In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King shares his vision of reforms and Jordan's democratic future in a series of discussion papers and calls on citizens to be actively engaged in the process. Lakhdar Brahimi pleads with world countries to push the warring parties for talks, saying the country would be ruled by warlords unless diplomacy is given a chance. And Israel eases its blockade of the Gaza Strip, allowing a shipment of gravel for private construction into Gaza for the first time since Hamas seized control in 2007. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. Since ascending the throne in 1999, His Majesty King Abdullah II has expressed a clear and consistent vision for comprehensive reform and the future of Jordanian democracy. In a series of discussion papers, the first of which was published by local media today, His Majesty lays out perspectives on specific elements of our journey towards realizing that future. The aim of the papers is to facilitate a national conversation around our reform roadmap and democratic transformation to build consensus, encourage citizens' participation in decision-making, and sustain the constructive momentum for reform. In the document titled Our Journey to Forge Our Path Towards Democracy, King Abdullah shares his vision for the principles and values needed to help the nation progress on its democratization journey under a constitutional monarchy. He calls on citizens to be fully engaged in the process because, quote, citizens breathe life into our democracy, end quote. The King lists 4 practices that citizens must embrace to help build a democratic system, adding they must develop those practices in their daily lives over the years to come. 1. Respect for all fellow citizens is the essence of our unity. 2. Citizenship and accountability go hand in hand. 3. Harnessing disagreement into compromise while maintaining constant dialogue. 4. Shared gains and sacrifices. Senate members and President met today to discuss the outlines included in His Majesty the King's first discussion paper, in which he shares his vision on reforms and the future of democracy in the kingdom. Senate President Tahir al-Masri said the points stated in His Majesty document are perfectly in harmony with people's aspirations as they initial the early steps towards a brighter future based on a real democratic system. During the discussion, Senate members commended His Majesty's approach as one that opens a forum for dialogue rather than provides directives. They said his key points offer ways to translate the principles needed for a smooth transition to democracy. The senators highlighted the role of the upper house in safeguarding the homeland by ensuring an intellectual discourse that will lead to national consensus on a comprehensive strategy for future governments. As the parliamentary election campaign got underway and upon an invitation by the Independent Election Commission, 24 observers of the European Union Election Observation Mission were today deployed to Jordan. The 24 long-term EU representatives make up the second contingent of EU observers following a core team that arrived in Jordan on the 13th of this month. They will cover all 12 governorates in both urban and rural areas and will observe the entire electoral process leading to parliamentary election on the 23rd of January. 28 short-term observers and a delegation of the European Parliament will join shortly before the election. In total, the EU will deploy 80 observers from 27 member states as well as Norway and Switzerland to be led by Chief Observer David Martin, a member of the European Parliament from the United Kingdom.
Today was the deployment of the 24 long-term observers for the European Union Election Observation Mission. Our observers arrived 4 days ago in the country, and after a 3 days intensive training, they departed already today for the governorates. We have 24 observers in 12 teams. Each team operates with 2 observers, 1 woman and 1 man, and they are going to be deployed in all the 12 governorates of the country. As you've seen before, they had all the materials that they needed with them, equipment that they will facilitate in their work, like printers and laptops, and now they have started their trips to the different governorates, from Irbid to Aqaba.
Foreign Minister Nasser Joude discussed with former Syrian Prime Minister Riyad Hijab latest developments in the Syrian crisis and efforts to end the bloodshed through a negotiated political solution. Joude voiced Jordan's support to Hijab as a key player in the opposition coalition, which was recently acknowledged by the Arab League as the legitimate representative of the Syrian people. He also reiterated the kingdom's position on the crisis, which calls for a political solution that would end the bloodshed, preserve the unity of the country, and help return security and stability to its towns and neighborhoods. Hijab, for his part, said he appreciated Jordan's stand on the crisis in Syria, especially hosting thousands of refugees who continue to flee the violence. International peace negotiator for Syria, Lakhdar Brahimi, pleaded with world countries to push the warring parties for talks, making a clear warning that the country would become a failed state ruled by warlords unless diplomacy is given a chance. Brahimi spent 5 days this week in Damascus, where he met President Bashar al-Assad, followed by a visit to Moscow to push for a peace plan that includes all the parties to the conflict. The Syrian leader's opponents, meanwhile, say they will not cease fire or join any talks unless Assad steps down and have largely dismissed Brahimi's initiative. Ra'ad Btoush has more.
Syria faces hell unless a political agreement is reached, an expression the International and Arab League envoy to Syria, Al-Akhdar al-Ibrahimi, used in Moscow yesterday. Today, the very same man reiterates the same message after meeting with Arab League chief Nabil al-Arabi in Cairo.
غير قادر أن أرى حل أو أن أرى أنه في أي شيء آخر.
I can't see a solution or anything but one of the following two possibilities. Either there will be a political solution that satisfies the Syrian people and release their ambitions and legitimate rights, or Syria will turn into an inferno.
حقوق المشروعة أو سوريا تتحول إلى جحيم.
Al-Ibrahimi and Al-Arabi also brought the Geneva plan back to the scene as a document for a political settlement in Syria. Ibrahimi echoed earlier emphasis that a political solution had to be based on the Geneva Agreement negotiated by his predecessor Kofi Annan shortly before Annan quit in frustration at the divisions among veto-wielding powers in the UN Security Council. For his part, Al-Arabi said that whilst world powers may have agreed to the ends of a peace mechanism, they still needed to decide on how this would be achieved.
But what the Geneva failed to agree upon in the final communique is a mechanism for implementation. And I think that's what they're trying to do now. What they're trying to find out if there will be a consensus between the most influential parties, and namely the members of this permanent members of the Security Council, on a mechanism to implement.
The Geneva Plan, signed in June, was a text agreed by members of the UN Security Council in Switzerland on a political transition for Syria. It implied that President Bashar al-Assad would have to step down. It included a ceasefire, the formation of a government, and steps towards elections, either for a new president or a new parliament. But despite regional and international efforts and debates to end the Syrian crisis, political endeavors seem to have reached an impasse, while Syrians are still paying the costly price of a war that has so far claimed the lives of around 44,000 people. Ra'ad Btoush, News at 10.
Despite diplomatic efforts led by Lakhdar Brahimi, violence continues in different parts of Syria. Opposition activists said many people were killed in Deir Baalbeh district after it was captured, and unverified rumors of a massacre spread across the country. In Hims, MiG warplanes bombarded the area overnight, and medium-range rockets hit Al-Khalidiyya, a rebel-held Sunni district. Elsewhere in the north, fighters surrounded an air defense base near Aleppo airport, and warplanes bombed rebel bases in an attempt to break the siege. The city of Azaz suffered extreme airstrikes which destroyed 6 homes and killed 11 people. Meanwhile, Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan told a crowd of thousands of Syrian refugees their country is preparing for what he called a sacred birth that would replace President Bashar al-Assad with the will of the Syrian people. Erdogan was speaking during a visit to one of the Syrian refugee camps in Turkey, which hosts some 150,000 people who have fled the conflict across the border. He told them they should regard Turkey as their second home. While the head of the Syrian National Coalition opposition, Mu'azz al-Khatib, standing by his side, Erdogan said help is at hand, adding that victory comes to those who are patient. Israel today eased its blockade of the Gaza Strip and allowed a shipment of gravel for private construction into the Palestinian territory for the first time since Hamas seized control in 2007. A Palestinian official overseeing the shipment of 20 truckloads of the material said it was the first time gravel has been allowed into Gaza for the Palestinian private sector since the blockade started. The gravel was transferred only a day after Egypt allowed building materials into Gaza through its Rafah crossing, moving away from its 6-year ban. The shipment was donated by Qatar, which has pledged $400 million to finance reconstruction. Representative of the Ministry of Works and Housing in Gaza, Yasser Shanti, said the arrival of the Emir of Qatar to the Gaza Strip in late October was instrumental in breaking the siege. And now they say the material was brought into the Gaza Strip via the Rafah land crossing above the ground rather than underneath it. Israel's Supreme Court ruled an Arab lawmaker could stand in elections, overturning her disqualification by electoral officials over her participation in a Gaza-bound aid flotilla 2 years ago. The 9-justice court ruled unanimously that Haneen Zarbi shall be a candidate for the Knesset in a poll on January 22nd without giving details of its reasons. Zarbi drew widespread criticism in Israel for taking part in an international aid flotilla that challenged the Israeli blockade of the Gaza Strip in 2010. The Central Elections Committee voted earlier this month to disqualify Zarbi, saying she had shown support for an enemy state or terrorist organization engaged in armed conflict against Israel. In response to that, Zarbi said she had no role in any of the violence on board the flotilla and that she had tried to mediate between the sides during the raid. The Egyptian pound hit a record low today after the central bank imposed a new currency regime to try and stem a deepening economic crisis in the country. And in what appears to be another looming crisis in Egypt, the Constitutional Court is to examine the legitimacy of the upper house of parliament. In its first session since going on strike over President Mohamed Morsi's decision to expand his powers, the court today set the 15th of January for the first hearing. It will also examine the legitimacy of the assembly that wrote the Constitution, approved at a referendum this month. Iran continued a series of naval, air, and army drills in the area of the Strait of Hormuz to display its capability to defend its maritime borders and to maintain durable peace in the region. Iran held a similar 10-day drill last December and sent a submarine and a destroyer into the Gulf 4 months ago, just as U.S. and allied navies were conducting exercises in the same waters to practice keeping oil shipping lanes open. We get more in this report.
Iran detonates a sea mine off its southern coast. A show of its military might, the country is conducting 6 days of naval, air, and army drills. State media broadcast images of submarines and ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian officials have conducted similar drills in the past to emphasize their ability to block the strategic strait if Iran faces a military attack over its disputed nuclear program. 40% of the world's seaborne oil exports pass through the strait. An Iranian Navy commander said the latest drill, which lasts until Wednesday, would test missile systems, combat ships, submarines, and reconnaissance methods.
Bodyguards for Iraq's deputy prime minister wounded 2 people when they fired warning shots at Sunni protesters who pelted his convoy with bottles and stones. The incident took place in the city of Ramadi, where Deputy Prime Minister Saleh al-Mutlaq had traveled to address people in an attempt to defuse sectarian tensions. Thousands of Iraqi Sunnis have taken to the streets and blocked a main highway over the past week in protest against Shiite Prime Minister Noor al-Maliki, whom they accuse of discriminating against them and being under the sway of Iran. Echoing slogans used in popular revolts in other Arab states, protesters have also been calling on Maliki to step down. In Libya, 2 Egyptians were killed and another 2 injured by an explosion in a Coptic church near the large port city of Misrata, east of the capital. Residents said the explosion took place in the early afternoon in a town where former rebel fighters born during the conflict of 2011 established a major dam. President Barack Obama said financial markets would be affected adversely if U.S. lawmakers fail to agree on a fiscal cliff deal before tomorrow. While low-income tax rates are due to expire tomorrow, lawmakers are seeking a last-minute deal that would set aside $600 billion in tax increases and across-the-board government sending cuts that are set to start within days. If Congress does not make that happen, the first bill brought up in the new year will be to reduce taxes for middle-income families. We get more details in this report.
U.S. President Barack Obama told NBC's Meet the Press that if Congress fails to avert the fiscal cliff, it will impact financial markets.
If, people start seeing that on January 1st, this problem still hasn't been solved, that we haven't seen the kind of deficit reduction that we could have had the Republicans been willing to take the deal that I gave them. If they say that people's taxes have gone up, which means consumer spending is going to be depressed, then obviously that's going to have an adverse reaction in the markets.
Without a deal, $600 billion in tax hikes and federal spending cuts will begin to take effect January 1st.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Obama signaled he was cautiously optimistic a deal can get done.
But we don't yet see an agreement, and now the pressure is on Congress to produce.
The Senate is scheduled to hold a rare Sunday session in the afternoon, and the House is expected to convene as well.
It seems that the world of beauty pageants is not exclusive for human beings. Elephants from Nepal took to the field to determine which of the gentle giants would win the top prize at the annual Elephant Beauty Contest. A short list of 3 elephants were selected from 5 to compete in the final round. It was then down to 5 expert judges to determine which of the 3 elephants were adorned with the finest decoration, as well as being deemed with the best temperament and personality. This is the 9th time the Elephant Festival is held in Nepal, and the 3rd time the Elephant Beauty Contest has been part of the festivities.
No.
Novak Djokovic defeated Nicolas Almagro 6-7, 6-3, 6-4 yesterday in the Abu Dhabi to win the Mubaddala World Tennis Championship for the 2nd year running. Almagro was called in to replace fellow Spaniard Rafael Nadal, who withdrew from the exhibition tournament because of an illness. The world #1 was in a relaxed mood, entertaining the crowd before Almagro won the first set tiebreak. Djokovic was amusing spectators but kept his eye on the ball when it mattered and went on to break Almagro's serve to take the 2nd set. The Serb kept the momentum to win the final set and lifted the trophy for the 2nd consecutive year. The tournament was part of Djokovic's preparation ahead of the first Grand Slam of the season, the Australian Open, due to begin on January 14 in Melbourne.
Djokovic to set 6-7, 6-3. Ladies and gents, your champion for 2012, the Mubaddala World Tennis Champion, Novak Djokovic.
We stay with tennis and the Hopman Cup in Australia. Spanish pairing Fernando Verdasco and Anabel Medina Garrigues beat France in the group section. Verdasco was beaten by France's Joe Winfried Tsonga 7-5, 6-3 in the men's singles match. But Garrigues won in the women's singles, beating Mathilde Johansson of France 6-3, 6-2. Spain will next play the U.S. team of Venus Williams and John Isner on Thursday, while France will go head-to-head against South Africa's Kevin Anderson and Chanel Scheepers. We continue with the Hopman Cup. The United States bounced back to beat South Africa in the women's division. Venus Williams showed she is in good shape ahead of the Australian Open after defeating Chanel Scheepers 4-6, 6-2, 6-3 in the first singles. The American reacted to take the next two sets and sealed her victory when South Africa's return hit the net. In the men's group, South Africa leveled the tie when Kevin Anderson beat John Isner in straight sets 7-6, 7-6. Venus Isner then combined to defeat South African pair Kevin Anderson and Chanel Scheepers 6-3, 6-2 to win the mixed doubles. The United States team will now face France on Tuesday, while South Africa will have to wait until Friday to play against the French team. Finally, a look at the weather. Cold tonight with high-altitude clouds and easterly light to moderate winds. Tomorrow it will be relatively cold in the hilly areas and fair in the rest of the country, with partly cloudy skies and easterly moderate to fresh winds. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a relatively cold night and cool tomorrow, with northerly moderate to brisk winds and calm seas. The weatherman warns of frost formation in the late hours of the night and early morning. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here are the main points once again. His Majesty the King shares his vision on reforms and Jordan's democratic future in a series of discussion papers and calls on citizens to be actively engaged in the process. Dr. Brahimi pleads with world countries to push the warring parties for talks, saying the country would be ruled by warlords unless diplomacy is given a chance. And Israel eases its blockade of the Gaza Strip, allowing a shipment of gravel for private construction into Gaza for the first time since Hamas seized control in 2007. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.